Greetings. My name is Pedro Noguera. I'm very pleased to participate in this event focused on the experience of Black people in Los Angeles. I'm going to gear my remarks to the state of Black children in Los Angeles. I'm going to focus a lot of my remarks on a study that I began with my colleague Tyrone Howard at UCLA that was released not long ago called Beyond the Schoolhouse, in which we document what's happening with Black children here in LA. And then I'm going to finish up by offering some recommendations. So I'm going to share my screen. As I mentioned, we labeled this or named this Beyond the Schoolhouse. We wanted to deliberately look beyond the academic indicators that we traditionally look at in education to paint a bigger picture of what's happening with Black children in Los Angeles. We started from the premise that racism has taken a toll, and we wanted to make it clear that racism takes many forms. There's the interpersonal dynamics that we're all aware of, that many times that's what we focus primarily on, but there's also the ideological dynamics, which continue to portray Black people in negative light. Black history is negated. And then there's institutional racism, practices that we've grown accustomed to that could perpetuate systematic bias, and then what we now call structural racism. Now, I could have also added internalized racism, which is the way, in fact, it starts to impact people of color, but that's for another presentation. By structural racism, we're really referring to the ways in which the history has shaped the present. And as we all know, you can't cut off history. And it keeps showing up in our economy. It produces disparities in education and in wealth, and it shapes the experiences of kids in schools. So these are NAEP scores that again reflect what we all know by now, the racial disparities, the so-called achievement gap. Most often, these disparities are presented as though they are about academic performance and not connected to history, the history of racial discrimination, the history of unequal education, unequal opportunity, which means that if you don't contextualize, you can't really address the problem, which is one of the reasons why, despite many efforts in the country, we have made so little progress, particularly in the education of Black children. Here in Los Angeles, despite a significant decline in the Black population, we continue to see Black children at greater risk than others, including Latinos. And we've seen no improvements. We have seen them for others, and we've seen rising graduation rates, but no improvements in college eligibility. So we want to know what's behind that. And we know that it has implications for long-term trends like who goes to college and how well they'll do. As you can see, Black children, Black students behind others. Now, as we all know, these patterns follow also discipline, and Black children more likely to be suspended, more likely to be absent from school than others, more likely to have experienced adverse childhood experiences, homelessness, foster care placement, an incarcerated parent, asthma. And we think that this is particularly important to keep in mind because if you only focus on what's happening in school and ignore these other issues, unlikely to make progress. So we drew attention to what was happening in greater Los Angeles, and lo and behold, drawing on some data from the Social Science Research Council, what it shows is the areas where Black people are still concentrated, we see the lowest Human Development Index. Human Development Index is a composite of everything from infant mortality to income, and it gives you a picture of the quality of life. And if those of you know LA know that South Central Watts is the darkest on the map, and it shows where the hardships are the greatest. And that follows a pattern. Environmental hardships are also pollutants more present in these communities, and toxic environments with respect that impact health and the well-being, not just of children, but families in these communities are more severe. So not surprisingly, the schools that are serving these children are also affected by these conditions. These schools also have frequent turnover in leadership, frequent turnover in teachers, often staffed by underprepared teachers, and for a long time, I've had insufficient counselors and social workers. We have concentrated needs, but we have an accumulated disadvantage, but not a corresponding response to address that problem. And so, not surprisingly, in schools that are serving more kids who are homeless or whose families have experienced homelessness, more children who are in the foster care system, tends to be those schools are not doing as well. So none of this should be surprising. Poverty impacts the performance of kids. What is very important that we all keep in mind is that poverty is not a learning disability. And what I mean by that is poverty can be mitigated. It's not to say we shouldn't do all we can to make sure kids are fed, supported, and lifted out of poverty. But we don't have to wait until that happens to take action. That's the key. So what does action look like? It looks like first, systematically addressing racial bias in our schools. And we're going to show some schools that have done that and how it makes a difference. We've got to make sure that we're addressing discipline patterns, grades, test scores, special ed placements, hiring patterns, and very importantly, learn from the schools that get better outcomes for Black children. So one of the questions we ask is, where are those schools? And lo and behold, when we started looking at which schools in LA are sending the greatest number of Black students to LA, what we learned is they're mostly integrated high schools. However, we saw some exceptions. And we're going to point those exceptions out. Because when we look closely at what these communities are doing to address these issues, what these schools are doing, we start to see a path and a way forward. So many of you have heard about the Harlem Children's Zone. It has been upheld as a national model for many years now. It serves over 6,000 children in central Harlem and has shown you can mitigate the effects of poverty and improve outcomes through a pre-K through college strategy. UCLA has been implementing a similar strategy at the Mann School in South Central and bringing in lots of resources from across the university. USC has been doing similar work with 40 schools that surround the USC campus called the Neighborhood Academic Initiative. We believe that school districts need to adopt similar approaches. If they can adopt what's called a multi-tiered system of support for schools, and we now have the resources to do so, we can see outcomes for kids improve, academic outcomes as well as social outcomes. One of the schools that produces more Black students than any other in LA for the UC system is King Drew Middle School, King Drew Science Magnet in Watts. And what's important is why. The school is a comprehensive school that offers a broad array of enriched learning experiences for students. It has a partnership with a medical school. Question we should ask ourselves is, why is there only one school like this? Why aren't there more? We just heard about the gift from Dr. Dre and Ivan and Young to build a new school like this, focused on the arts and creativity at Audubon Middle School. That's an exciting development, and we need to see more. So let me close here and just, again, reinforce the message. Education's got to be part of the strategy for changing outcomes for Black people in Los Angeles. But it's not about doing what we've been doing. It's about changing course, making schools more responsive to the needs of kids. If you look at current data, what we're seeing is almost 40% of Black parents are reluctant about sending their kids back to school. Think about that for a moment. That's higher than for any other group. And a lot of that is because what they've been getting historically has been insufficient, inadequate. We cannot afford to return to the status quo. We've got to use this moment to demand something better for our children. I hope that all of you will stand with me and others to make this happen. Thank you for the time, and I wish you all the very best.